Okay, so here's your video notes on Russia in the 19th century. I apologize if they're boring with no pictures, but I have a cold, there's a blizzard coming, and there's nothing fun about Russia in the 19th century, so why should we celebrate that? But anyways, we're going to take you all the way through the second half of the 19th century in Russia in this video. So, surprise, surprise, Russia falls behind again. They are way behind industrialization compared to Germany, compared to France, compared to Great Britain. And this is evident because they are embarrassingly defeated in the Crimean War against the British and the French in 1854 over some territory in the Ottoman Empire. You'll read a little bit more about that in McKay. The war itself is not a big deal except for the fact that it shows their hand. It shows the rest of Europe, which didn't even know a lot about Russia, it's still isolated, that they are way behind everybody else. They had an inferior navy, their weapons were bad, they were decimated by the opposing forces, and now everybody in Europe's laughing at them. So of course they had to do something about this. So the next czar to come into power was Alexander II, and he replaced an anti-democratic Nicholas I. You might remember from a previous chapter, the Decembrists were these military officers who tried to overthrow Nicholas I and create a constitutional monarchy in 1825, and that failed. So he was not a very democratic czar. He didn't do a whole lot for Russia. When Alexander II comes in, he tries to initiate reforms. One of the reforms he creates is he gives power to these zemstvos, which are local ruling councils, and they're allowed to kind of make decisions within their community, their town, their village, their small city. It's made up of many different types of people, including working class men. Um, and that's a step in the right direction. The Zemstvos didn't actually have a ton of power, but they had something. Alexander II also issued an edict emancipating serfs in 1861. Finally, the serfs of Russia are emancipated. They're kind of the last ones to be set free in Europe. Now, this Emancipation Proclamation did not give serfs any land, so it was effectively useless as far as giving the serfs power, but they weren't bound to the land legally anymore. So they still ended up working the same land, but they weren't required by law to do so. Alexander II also embarks on some economic modernization. He builds more railroads, industries created, so they're starting to modernize Russia under Alexander II. Unfortunately, he doesn't last very long. He's assassinated by a radical nihilist group, which means that they believe in blowing up the existing structure, the power structure, and starting over from scratch. And that group was called the Narodniki, or the Narodnik. And they actually didn't like Alexander II because they thought he wasn't progressive enough, that he wasn't doing enough to change Russia and give people more power. So these radical students threw a grenade into his carriage and assassinated him. So when he's assassinated, Alexander III takes over. If your dad's assassinated by radicals, you're probably going to come down hard on liberals and on modernization. So Alexander III sees this assassination as a consequence of the weakness of Alexander II for giving in too much to the people. So Alexander III ruled with an iron fist. He rolls back basically all of the reforms. The Zemstvos have no power. You are no longer allowed to speak your mind at all. He censored the press. No free speech. He forces what's called Russification on all of those who are not traditional Russians. So if you are not an Orthodox Christian, if you do not follow the Tsar, then you are forced to convert. You are forced to do what he says, specifically Jews, which is a huge population in Russia. Millions of Jews in Russia are forced to convert or be persecuted for being a Jew. In fact, a lot of the Jews in Russia at this time emigrate to other parts of Europe and to the United States because of this Russification movement. So Alexander III naturally is resented by a majority of the Russian people because he is so ruthless, and he uses a secret police to crack down on people who are a threat to him. The good news is that Alexander III dies, and Nicholas II becomes Tsar in 1894. Nicholas II did not want to be Tsar. He wasn't ready to be Tsar. I feel like we've heard that before, right, with the French Revolution and Louis XVI. But nonetheless, he becomes Tsar in 1894, and he continues the modernizations that Russia had been going through over the last few decades. St. Petersburg finally gets some urban planning, gets redesigned, looks more like a European city, like Paris, for example. He funds the ballet and arts and sciences academies. He continues industrialization. There are many, many, many more Russians working in mills than ever before and factories than ever before. A vast majority of Russians are still working the land, working the farms, but more are working in factories. So Russia's kind of going through their industrial revolution at this time. He still insists, though, on upholding the autocracy. He's not big on political reform and giving more people rights. That's going to change in 1905 for a couple reasons. 1905 is a really bad year for Nicholas II and for Russia. In 1905, Russia goes to war with Japan. And you'll learn more about Japan in the next chapter about imperialism, but Japan is a quickly rising world power. And just, 50 years, 100 years before this, they were closed off from the world. They were using swords and horses. They didn't even have guns. So when Russia gets in a territory dispute over a territory called Manchuria in China with Japan, they figure, oh, this will be an easy war, no problem. These guys are backwards. They're weirdos. Turns out Japan's new modern navy is way superior still to Russia's navy. In fact, Russia's navy is also poorly planned, poorly executed, poorly led by the admirals. So this is an embarrassing defeat by Japan. They're forced to accept terms of surrender. They signed the Treaty of Portsmouth, which is actually in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and negotiated by Teddy Roosevelt, who gets the Nobel Peace Prize for that. But this is embarrassing to Russia on the world stage, but also inside the country. The people, especially the workers, are so upset that people are dying in this war and so much money is being put in this war while so many people have it rough in Russia and nothing's getting better. So the workers, in reaction to the Russo-Japanese War, go on strike and they protest at the Winter Palace of the Tsar about wages and rising bread prices. Again, something we've seen before in the French Revolution. That comes to a head at the event we call Bloody Sunday in 1905, when hundreds of protesters at the Winter Palace who were peacefully protesting are shot and killed by the Tsar's forces. And this sets all the workers on fire. More riots, more strikes, bad year for Russia. So the terrible things happening in 1905 force the Tsar to come to the table and actually make some changes. The Tsar was actually being pressured by the aristocracy, his own friends, to show some willingness to reform to get things under control. So reluctantly in 1905, the Tsar issues the October Manifesto, which restores civil rights to many Russians, and it promises to create a constitutional monarchy where the Tsar will work with a parliament called the Duma. This is not really as big of a deal as most people would like it to be, because in 1906, when the Duma is formed, the first set of laws that go through are called the Fundamental Laws. And the Fundamental Laws of 1906 make it so that the Tsar has almost unchecked power over the Duma. And in fact, the Duma is loaded up with his friends, and it works in a way that he basically gets what he wants. The Duma is not this independent check on his power. It looks a lot more like the government of Germany in the German Empire with Otto von Bismarck and Wilhelm I. Nonetheless, tension is still rising, and not much is settled politically, and this just shows us that while there is a responsive government in Germany, in France, in Great Britain, to an extent in Austria at this time, and the rest of Europe, Russia goes through these hot and cold patterns of trying to be responsive and also cracking down on their own people, and while they are gradually industrializing, they have way bigger issues than a lot of other countries in Europe. So that's your background on Russia in the 19th century. Be sure to do the reading, the supplemental reading up on Moodle, and good luck with this snowstorm.